Good evening and welcome to Decameron Opera Coalition presents our happy hour, Librettists in Conversation. I'm your host, Matt Barresi, co-creator of Tales from a Safe Distance and librettist of the opera, The Happy Hour, that forms the frame around the 10 opera world premieres that make up Tales from a Safe Distance. If you're joining us tonight, hopefully you've already seen Tales from a Safe Distance. If you haven't, it's not too late. Go to decameronoperacoalition.org, and until the end of the year, these operas are available streaming on demand. Now, last week we had an happy hour in which we spoke to the producers. That's the heads of all the opera companies that make up this unprecedented collaboration. Never before in opera history have 9 American opera companies come together for a co-production, but here they were forming a 10th company, the Decameron Opera Coalition. Next week, we're going to take Friday off to focus on not going shopping, I suppose. But the Friday afterwards, December 4th, we will be together with the composers. And I believe that will be hosted by my dear friend and partner in crime, Peter Hilliard. So tune back in on December 4th for the composers. But tonight, it's the librettists. And for the uninitiated, that means the folks who wrote the words to all these pieces. And it's an absolute murderer's row of talent and personality tonight. And I can't wait to introduce them. A little bit more sales before we go there. Please do note that the holidays are coming up. Gifts can be given, and you can still get tickets to Tales from a Safe Distance. I don't want to position a piece of art with a value proposition, but it is only $15 for 10 world premiere operatic films. It is a fantastic view of the spectrum of what opera can be and is in this country and what it is becoming. This is an extremely innovative event, and already plenty of folks are coming to imitate the style, and I want you to see the OG anthology film opera event, Tales from a Safe Distance. All right, time to meet our guests. We have the librettists from all 10 pieces, and I'm going to call on them, and what I'd love for them to do is say their name, the opera that they created and for which company, and what city on this crazy blue marble they are resting their pen in this evening. All right, why don't we start with Margie Price.
I'm Margie Price, and I worked on Everything Comes to a Head for Lyric Opera of the North, which is based in Duluth, and so am I. Duluth, Minnesota, that is, on the beautiful shores of Lake Superior.
Very nice. Well, welcome. Now, Jean Rodham Schrammick is your writing partner on the words portion of Everything Comes to a Head. So I'd like to introduce Jean. Oh, I think you're muted, Jean.
Hi,
Thank you.
I'm Jean Schrammick, and basically what Margie just said, only my name is Jean.
Jean Schrammick, welcome. All right,
Yeah.
let's while we're in the great state of Minnesota, why don't we say hello to their librettist, Jenny O'Connell.
Hi there, I'm Jenny O'Connell. I collaborated with Brennison on The Sky Where You Are, which was an opera theater or AOT's production, and they're from Minneapolis. And I am calling in from Portland, Maine.
Portland, Maine, very nice, welcome. So you're gonna get if you're not already familiar with this, you're going to get an idea of what a global operation opera is all the time, because we've got the city where the piece was produced, where the home company is. The artists themselves may be in a separate city altogether, and a different city from their collaborators. So I'd like to introduce from Women's Advocates, Brennison Wheeler.
Hi everyone, Brennison Wheeler. I supported Jenny in writing The Sky Where You Are with AOT, and I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota.
From St. Paul, thank you very much. All right. Bear Opera, Nicholas Hochstein Cox.
Hi, I'm Nick Cox. I wrote The Late Walk for Bear Opera, which is a New York-based opera company, and I am coming to you from Breitbrunn am Chiemsee in the Bavarian Alps of southern Germany.
Well, welcome. Now, in Germany, there are actually, in many parts of Europe, there have been curfews on electricity and on the internet. So are we going to lose you all of a sudden?
Not tonight, not tonight. So we have I'm in a different house to normal, specifically so I can have Wi-Fi for as long as I need. It was a bit of an uphill battle, but no curfews for us tonight. So I'm here for the entirety of this.
All right. Well, thank you for fighting that battle. We appreciate it. Jill the Lions, hello.
Hi, I am the composer and the librettist of Sourdough Rise Up, and I was working with Resonance Works Pittsburgh and Maria Sensi Sellner there, who's fabulous, and they're wonderful artists, and I'm based in New York.
Very nice. Welcome. And I should mention that Maria Sensi Sellner and her husband, Brendan Sellner, are working the production aspect of tonight. So they are on this call in spirit anyhow and in our ears, letting us know what questions you are asking out there in internet land. Deborah Brevoort, hello.
Hi, I'm Deborah Brevoort. I wrote Dinner for Three, which was produced by Fargo Moorhead Opera, and I'm zooming in from West Milford, New Jersey.
West Milford. All right. Welcome. John De Los Santos. Good evening.
Hi, I'm John De Los Santos. I wrote and directed The Roost for Urban Arias, and I'm in Manhattan.
Very nice. Welcome. Hello. Back to the Midwest, Danny Brylow up in Milwaukee.
I am Danny Brylow. I wrote the libretto for Orsa Ibernata for Milwaukee Opera Theater, which is based in Milwaukee, where I currently am.
Very nice. While we're in the Chicago-Milwaukee corridor, my friend KF Jacques is here.
I am Kari F. Jacques Laurent. I am the composer and librettist for Corsair for Chicago Fringe Opera, and I am in Chicago.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. And Dr. Donia Girard is on the call.
Hi, everyone. My name is Donia Girard, and I'm the composer and librettist for Seven Spells, which was performed and produced by Opera in the Heights in Houston, but I am in Los Angeles.
Hello, hello, hello. So we've got a wonderful spread, a global spread, certainly all of the US, and we're in Europe tonight as well, as perhaps some are you watchers and listeners out there. Okay, let's talk to these folks. Now, if you watched the after parties of Tales from a Safe Distance, we talked a lot about how we chose the chapters from the Decameron that we adapted. I'd like to go beyond those issues tonight and really get down to the words on the page, some process questions, some questions about character voice. We'll see how far we can get in one short hour. But let's begin with, I'd love to talk about collaboration. So some of the teams on here had more than one words person. It's tricky enough, of course, to work with a composer. And the first question, I know all of you who've done talkbacks after an opera have heard the first question is always what comes first, the music or the words, right? But in some cases, we've got two people working on the words. Now, if you've ever heard a talk by the late, great Betty Comden and Adolph Green, who wrote Singing in the Rain and On the Town and Wonderful Town, they were both the words people, lyrics, and book on so many wonderful shows. And they would ask them, how do you divide your work? And Betty would say, well, I sit at the typewriter. I type it all out. I write the scans. I figure out the song form. I write all the rhymes. And they'd say, wait, if you do all that, what does Adolph do? And she said, well, he provides the madness. So I gather he would really be in charge of the comic angle of it. So I want to know, Margie and Jean, you've worked together for many years. I believe you come from a comedy background and have written comedy together. Margie, of course, is a New York Times best-selling and Newbery honor-winning children's author. But could you first tell me about the history of your collaboration?
Sure. Yeah, we go way back because we worked together in a comedy theater company called Colder by the Lake, which did mostly review comedy, sketch comedy, but then we branched out into, Shakespeare and opera.
Radio and yeah, all kinds of things.
Yeah, and so I think through working in an ensemble theater company setting where everybody contributes and things are worked and reworked and you change things and you improvise and so on, that informed how we started working together when we actually started writing things and not just working from improv. So it's almost impossible to describe because it's been going on so long.
Yeah.
How it works, but I will say that in our relationship, Jean provides the comedy, and I type.
See, and I have a slightly different way of putting that. And that is Margie has the big picture and she has the long threads of what's going on. And I'm more likely to do like smaller projects or, you know, just more details, I think.
Sure.
But she's the one who kind of, you know, sees the, like what it's going to be. And I think in terms of, you know, like working on a specific song or a specific passage or something like that.
And did this, I mean, this piece, of course, we all wrote it in a pandemic. So we were in a room with people far fewer times than we normally would be. And, you know, opera has a certain amount of, and always has had a certain amount of, I'm going to mail you something and you'll mail it back to me. But in this case, it was bound by absolute necessity. Margie, did it tend to be act react? Would you send her some words and then she would add jokes and shine it up? Or how did it work when it came to the actual words to this piece?
Well, what happened was I started writing this by myself and then panicked. and I just sent it to Jean and, you know, like, help me. So it was pretty much all there, but it wasn't good. No, there were some problems here and there. So it's just as a great, for me, working with somebody in this format. I don't think I could do it in a novel, but in this kind of format, just the words going back and forth. Well, what about this? Oh, you know, that gives me an idea, another idea. How about that? So we do a lot of kind of going back and forth like that. And I think just having somebody to bounce that off of and get some wheels going, get some wheels turning. It seems like it really helps the whole project. Plus it's more fun. It's just fun. But yes, I just sent the whole thing to her and talked some of the problems she just went after, so.
Well, that's wonderful. And it makes sense that you have a comedy background because although while your source material is one of the more grim out of many grim stories from the Decameron, the piece is a riot. And it's very sweet actually and very funny. So I can see those comedy roots in the piece. Well, very nice. Now, Jenny and Brennison, you've also got two people working on the story and words side of this. Jenny, you are a prose writer, and Brennison, you're with Women's Advocates. So please tell me, how were the words to this piece born between the two of you?
Well, Kelly Turpin, the producer for AOT, is a college friend of mine. We went to music school together. And so when she asked me to write The Sky Where You Are, one of my big reservations was not having the proper experience or the proper advocacy knowledge. I believe in own voices, and I really felt strongly about working with somebody who like has experience in the area that we're talking about. And Brennison, Kelly brought Brennison in as the expert, and I'll let Brennison talk about that with what she does with Women's Advocates, but I couldn't and wouldn't have done this without her. I kind of provided the craft background and the writing and the prose, and Brennison brought in the like deep knowledge of advocacy that was needed to really make this piece what it was. So Brennison, I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, I think it's really cool because there isn't too much work that I'm aware of with specific domestic violence advocacy overlapping with the arts. And so when this opportunity presented itself, I said, absolutely, I'll drop whatever I'm doing. I need to talk to this person and really dig into, well, what do we need to communicate? How can we communicate it in an artful, but also thought-provoking and empathetic way? And so the process for me was not very structured, which is different from how I do a lot of my work in the community at the domestic violence shelter. I'm normally very, very type A, but I think
I'm not. I'm like the opposite.
lack of structure allowed it to be very authentic and very creative. Of Jenny just asking me, what are common experiences during the pandemic? What is different for domestic violence survivors now that there may be limitations on a more state or a national level of things that promote kind of this feeling of isolation and other things. And so the process for me was saying, these are the things that I present in the community. Like some of the main questions that I get from community members, from health professionals, et cetera, across the board. And how can we integrate that into this work? And so it started with, we know that we want to have a conversation that highlights advocacy. So a conversation between the victim survivor and the friend who is across the country. And then that was it. And then we just ran from there. So then the different elements started building when I was talking about the crisis line, about the calls coming from the bathroom with the shower running. So that was a huge piece that came into composing the piece. So then it just kind of snowballed from there and unraveling the story and different components that we hear from actual survivors.
Very nice, very nice. Now, everyone on this call had a very short process because the inception to premiere of this piece was very short. And opera theaters was the very shortest process. I believe it was 11 weeks from the time that Kelly signed on to the time the piece premiered. So did, you had this big talk, and Brenison gave you all this information, Jenny, that you could use to create a piece with authenticity. Did she ever get another pass at it once you wrote it?
Yeah, well, we wrote it in about 5 days. And so the first 2 days were just like full on research. So that's when Brenison and I had our first conversation. And I think the third or fourth day, I sent it to Brenison, and she was able to kind of pick through it and look over it and make sure that all the language was just right. And she and another one of her colleagues were able to give some additional feedback. So there was kind of the formation of it, and then they were able to take a pass at edits, which was great.
Wonderful, very nice. All right, so we've just talked to two teams that had more than one person on words. We're going to kind of swing to the other end of the spectrum and talk to the composer librettists. So two of the pieces had the same person writing the music and writing the words. So, and that's Gilda and Donia. Gilda, you're frequently a one-woman wrecking crew. You not only write music, you write words. You're a performance artist and a singer as well. So I know that you sometimes perform pieces that you've written. Tell me about, and this is a completely foreign process to me, but how did you write this as the composer librettist? When you're the same person, how do you determine what comes first, the words or the music?
Well, I think the beautiful thing about being composer librettist is that it can happen, and it can actually happen at the same time. It's very much a process of discovery. And I found that with this piece, that yes, you're absolutely right to note that we had a very compressed time frame, but it was days of thinking and allowing the characters' voices to start coming through, both musically and in their language and in their bodies. What are their bodies saying? What is their movement like? I think very visually. I was formally trained as a visual artist before I ever learned to read music. And so it was a full, I kind of think it's a three-dimensional process of discovering the character in being the composer librettist. So it happened simultaneously, and so that when it came time to actually write it down, it was like a download to actually getting it, not because I hadn't been discovering, but because I was discovering internally. Like the collaboration was happening in my head over the course of the time between when I met with Maria to the time I just downloaded everything that had been evolving down to the age.
Now you're a vocalist. I feel like it's a very voices forward piece. It's not an a cappella piece, but I feel like the harmony is very, very present and the voices are very present. Did you write this at the piano? Do you write this singing? What's your process there?
Yeah, I rarely go to the piano for, I mean, I'll go for pitch reference sometimes, but it is voices forward. That's where I start. And I mean, it's not always where I start, but for this piece, that was necessary. I felt, and so it was. It's really that what was curious was then writing for people that were going to be recording individual parts from 3 different cities, right? But you know, I actually felt so confident in the team and the process that I didn't allow myself to be steered toward any particular thing because of that. This was a monster team, and I knew that if I had close harmonies and interlocking rhythms, that they could do it, and they did, and they were fantastic. So, yeah, but yeah, absolutely, the vocal line is my primary concern in an opera. That to me is appropriate.
I agree. Wagner might not, but most of opera agrees. Now that I know that you're a
Yeah, but we're alive, so we win.
We get the last word on him. Your brother did the illustrations. Now that I know that you're a visual artist, were you hassling your brother the whole time as he turned in his drawings?
He's my big brother and my hero for my entire life, so I rarely hassle him except to be annoying and make him wear party hats, you know, and sing to me and things. But it was really just like, I mean, I love this person and I have such respect and admiration for him that it was more the joy of being able to say, oh, what if, you know, like, just like, what about this? Makes me think of, you know, that there's a moment where one of our characters has these like fantasy of what perfection in life would be in signing with management. And so I said, what about like rainbows and unicorns? You know, and he did this beautiful thing. And then it's like, what if they blew up? And so he's got literally the unicorns bursting into flame, which my 9-year-old loved. It was his favorite part of the whole thing. And, you know, it made him laugh. And I think for him, it was joyful too, that we had that extra layer that he's like, show this to Seamus. If it flies with Seamus, then we're good. So.
You know, my 9-year-old was low-key mortified when the unicorns blew up, but she came around. It grew on her.
I'm so sorry. You know, there you go.
Well, Donia, you are also a composer, librettist, and multi-instrumentalist. I would love to hear your process and how it compared to Jilna's.
Sure. So a large part of my process actually, so Jilna said, can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, great. So she was just saying that she doesn't really write at the piano, and actually I'm the opposite. I start everything either vocally or at the piano. So a large part of my writing process consists of me just improvising, and it's singing based as well as piano based. So when I'm writing, I usually am either not necessarily full on singing, but vocalizing. I gotta close the window because it's like people are coming back from work and it's loud.
I'm just jealous that it's sunny.
So, you know, I do a lot of that, and I record myself doing that, and then I kind of break it down from there, and then I'll go to the score and I'll start notating it. And I also spend a lot of time reading fiction and studying lyrics and poetry from, you know, some of my favorite authors and favorite singer-songwriters. So, you know, I grew up with Nina Simone, Tori Amos, Bjork, Radiohead, and when I was writing this piece, I was also reading this book by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. It's called Women Who Run with the Wolves. I'm not
I know this book.
sure
I've read
if anybody else has. Yeah, it's got these intercultural myths and folk tales and fairy tales about, you know, different kinds of women and also non-binary and two-spirit people, like in the, you know, across the entire book. So that kind of informed my writing process in this as well. Yeah.
So I'm not incorrect in saying that there were some pop influences in there. I mean, your piece is it's a concert aria, really, or at least, I mean, I hate to impose my categorization on it, but it feels like a concert aria. And I felt like there were pop influences.
Definitely. You're 100% right. The influences, I had created a mood board like a visual mood board that I sent the director, Abbas Padilla. And so on there were some of my favorite contemporary artists. So Mitski, her Geyser video. I had Black Belt Eagle Scout Softstead, who's a queer feminist singer-songwriter who's indigenous. I had Agnes Obel, Bjork's Hunter video, Sinead O'Connor's Nothing Compares to You, FKA Twigs, who I really love, and then LA-based Mazzy Star, that kind of early post, it's like between post-punk, new wave, and then like that 90s Nirvana grunge thing. Like in between that, there's a few years in there where there's some great female-led bands. So all of those videos and a lot of those artists, their music deals with like isolation, feeling like a lot of people who identify as women or female, their work deals with like feeling like not good enough, feeling like, you know, the things that you're constantly being judged for as a musician, as an artist, and a woman. So that theme of like isolation and being out in nature, being in domestic settings really influenced this as well. And, you know, I was sending, when I was working on it, I was sending Karin like little clips of me singing different vocal lines and being like, I just did this. And, you know, I did, and I also, there was also, because that's what I do, like I just record a lot of voice memos. Or if I get an idea and I'm driving or I'm walking, I'll, you know, take out my phone and record it. But I sent Karin a lot. And actually there's one section where there's a section in the song where she's singing Firelight, like, I'm not gonna do it. I can't sing like her. But I had told her, like, I just want you to take that for those 4 bars and just improvise with it. And so that kind of style for me also is, I don't wanna go too far because I know I have to hear from other people, but there's a huge influence of mine is the improvisational style from Arabic music as well. So it's just like an amalgamation of all those things, is intercultural, cross-cultural, like amalgamation of all of that.
Well, that's I want to, we got a half hour yet, but I want to stop the call and go watch the piece again and listen for all the influences. It's very exciting. And I hope that all the viewers will do that indeed. And I'm sure Karin appreciated that. Like it seems like there was some openness to her artistry in the collaboration. I mean, she was there before it was written all the way, and had some agency in the piece. Yes.
Yeah, that's a huge, for me, when I'm working on something as a composer, I really don't like, there's kind of this traditional thing of like, I'm the composer, so every single note on the page is exactly what it has to be, and you have no authority to change it. And I'm strongly anti that. So because so much of what I do is improv based as well, like I'm all for the singer, whoever the musicians I'm working with, like giving them proper credit and letting them kind of just do their own thing, because you're working with someone who's hugely talented. And I think part of pop music, something of pop music that really bothers me too, is that a lot of times women who are singers, they're like not given writing credit. It's like, oh, she didn't produce that, she didn't write that, she didn't whatever, you know, like she had a whole team behind her. And it's like, well, yeah, she has a team behind her because she's a boss, but also like being able to sing and have the authority as a singer to do a certain inflection or deliver something that maybe the composers or producers didn't see, that's a huge skill set. And I think just more composers need to kind of cash in on that.
Oh, I agree. I love it. Now, I'm blissing out now. I could go for 12 hours with this talk. I love hearing from you folks and about your artistry. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's talk to somebody who I guess we'd say is from outside the industry. But Nick Cox, you are a writer. You write prose. You write graphic novels, comic books, which I've maintained that the closest correlate to writing opera libretti is writing comic books, more so than writing musical theater, more so than writing theater. I feel like the way music does the heavy lifting versus the way art does the heavy lifting, the economy, the passion, I feel like it's almost 1-to-1 with comics. Yeah. I'll comment on whether or not that I'm all wet. But you're also an architect. An architect. You're not an architect. Maybe you're an architect.
No, I'm not.
Archaeologist. So I want to hear about how your other writing and how your science background does or doesn't dovetail with your libretto writing.
Right. Oh, that's a really exciting question. Thank you. So I'm just sort of, yeah. So my writing experience prior to this has been more in either academic writing or prose. It's been science fiction writing, and as you say, it's been comic book work and things like that. This was my first time writing opera. And then, as you sort of say, yes, I'm also an archaeologist. That's my day job. By night, I do Zoom calls with amazing opera-involved people, and by day, I dig Neolithic pits. And I would say definitely my experience it was very interesting. So my science fiction writing background, I mean, the opera I wrote, the note I made for the composer, because I wrote the libretto before we had secured the composer. And when we actually had the composer, I sent the libretto through to them, and it was all written prior to the composition. And so the notes I sent through, because I had extensive storyboarding effectively for what I wanted it to look and sound like, was the comic book background. And I was saying, I want it to sound like the Twilight Zone here. Make this sound like Stranger Things. Could we do an element here? And it was all references to the science fiction and the horror that I consume, but also more that I write as well. I mean, I have been writing science fiction horror novella. That's my sort of main output for written work as of late. And I almost, in many ways, I treated The Late Walk like it was an extension of that. Without realizing it either, I sort of thought, oh no, I'll do a very honest opera libretto here. And then once I got into it, I realized I had ghosts and plague and not time travel, but I had elements of different time periods. And that's the archaeology coming through as well. I mean, I'm fascinated with history. So in my stage direction originally, I mean, I had the most detailed costuming descriptions of what the people from the 20s would be wearing. Because I'm like, well, of course, the hat would look like this naturally, because up till 1919, the American Expeditionary Force in France wore this kind of uniform. None of that actually was relevant at all to the writing of it, but this was what I put into it, because it's this historical background that I'm obsessed with, and it's the horror science fiction prose. And I learned a lot actually by listening to everybody else's operas. I learned a lot about opera writing after the fact, such as that opera can rhyme. And also I think, I mean, it can be more lyrical and less prose. I learned a lot through this process, but yeah, definitely coming from the outside and coming into this was incredibly exciting. And I took my novel, and it's interesting what you said about the graphic novels too. I think that's a really interesting observation, but one I couldn't agree with more, about the illustration and the writing going hand in hand with the writing and the performance and the visual elements too.
In your comic book work, are you the artist, or do you work with artists?
It's a combination. So currently I have it here. I have a horror story, a short one, a very little one that I wrote, and it's all prose. There's no illustrations. And for that, I'm working with an illustrator in Denmark who is currently producing the illustrations for that, because illustrating comic books isn't that fun all the time, because you have to illustrate every scene, and that includes the really boring scenes as well as the really exciting ones. So I lose interest. So I much prefer writing prose, because prose, you just describe everything, and that's fun to do. And you get someone else to do the illustrations. But in some things that are yet to be published, it's all my illustrations and my writing.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about learning the specificities of libretto writing as you win, but I think very exciting about your piece and about so many of these pieces is what people did bring from their other lives. I think that's probably true of all the pieces. And American opera, whatever that means, American opera has been trying to find its identity for as long as there has been an America with opera happening in it. And I think if we do find a definition for whatever that means, it probably will come from these outside ingredients that all of you folks are folding into the work. Well, congratulations on it. And I know that, we've been having secret conversations over the course of the week about possible secret projects of yours in the future that make you your scientific background and your new libretto writing steez. So
I would love to make this a bigger part of what I do, because this was a delight, and it's almost like the after effects. I mean, the opera went out there and that was amazing, and then this ongoing sort of these conversations, these Zoom calls. This has been a really fun element too, getting to know people, even tonight, meeting new people and sort of expanding that world has been incredibly fun, as it was not my world at all beforehand. And I've really enjoyed it. And yes, as we've said in our secret conversations, I have many plans to make this a more permanent part of what I'm doing, because you can only dig so many holes before you have terrible neck and back pain and you want to stop doing archaeology for a while. I really enjoyed the lockdown because it meant I didn't have to dig holes anymore, so I could just focus on my writing and my illustrations.
Well, we got that anyhow. Well, very nice. Well, we look forward to hearing more about your clandestine project.
Yes, thank you.
I mentioned that Gilda and Donia are composer librettists. We have another composer librettist in the group, and that, of course, is Kari, KF Jacques. Hello. I want to talk about, with your piece, same question for you, of course, when you're doing the music and the words, how do you work that out? Your piece is definitely a fusion piece. It's fused with hip hop. Hip hop itself has fusion in it, so you can't really have hip hop without rap and funk and R&B. And you hear all those things in there. Now, you're formally trained as a singer and in the opera world, but you've also got this hip hop career. And I would love to know how you decide what goes where. Because I mean, there is virtuosic rap in this piece. There is a piece where you, and of course the great Takesha Michelle Keysart, are on the shores of Lake Michigan, just doing like thundering romantic opera. How's that happen?
I basically just stole all of my favorite things and tried to put them into one ball of joy. It was entirely selfish. I was only doing what I wanted to do. For the most part, the beats came first. I'm also a beat maker. I have a master's in voice performance, classical voice. So I was singing opera for quite some time. And when I started putting these tracks together, I started combining everything probably about 10 years ago. And so it sort of evolved into this thing. So what you all heard was sort of the culmination of that experience, with just sort of fusing opera and pop and rap all together. I was trying to illustrate the themes from the story. So there were themes of Chicago. Well, the main theme was the theme of like the seafarer. So it's Corsair. And I really wanted to make sure that the sea theme would sort of resonate in the music. So with the libretto, I was throwing in some references like they used to bow, now they're up in my bow. I tried to be stern, now I got to learn. So, just like some interesting references to the sea. And then, the rap is a very Chicago style of pentameter with the rap. And with the operatic parts, I really wanted to use them as a way to heighten the emotion of everything. So I'm pretty sure the opera came last in most of the writing process, but the beats were definitely first, and then the raps were used as more of a descriptor, and the opera was used to convey more emotion.
Very nice. Well, it was certainly a success. And now, speaking of references, I think there was a nerdy reference in there as well that I enjoyed immensely. Do you recall what it was?
I don't know. There's a lot of nerdy references.
I was going to say that too.
Oh, Donia, I gotta say that I love Bjork, and she's a huge influence on me. I volunteered to do this is the only time I've ever volunteered to be an usher, but I volunteered to be an usher at Auditorium Theater here in Chicago when Bjork came.
Oh, holy shit!
Yeah,
So
and it was 100% worth it. It was the smartest thing I've ever done.
Wait, which show? Like which album? What year was it?
This was, I can't even remember. well, oh, I even kept the pass. Hold on, I can tell you what year.
Yes, I'm so excited. I've actually never seen her live. Like the one time I was supposed to see her live was in Paris when I was there for this thing like 10 years ago. And then I got really sick and I couldn't go. And so I gave my ticket to a friend.
05, 06. This was 05, 06 season. And she was doing, this was right after, I think it was Volta or Voltaic or something like that. Whichever the one was, we are the earth intruders.
We are the sharpshooters.
Yeah. But when you mention Hunter is my favorite Bjork song. And
no
and also album, because there's Bachelorette on there. Sorry, I just geeked out on that. So sorry, Matt. Going back to the geeking out part, the Star Wars reference that you're thinking about.
Star Wars,
right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can't even remember what it was.
I can tell you.
Oh,
Kessel.
The Kessel Run.
The Kessel Run, yeah.
making runs by the Kessel. Yeah. Huge influence on my life as well. But yeah, that's definitely part of it. So the Kessel Run, for those who aren't familiar, is it's a bootlegging corridor. It's a fictitious place in the Star Wars trilogy that's like this bootlegging corridor. So all of the persona non grata, like, characters, if it's what do you call a rite of passage for people. So yeah, this was part of the Kessel Run, or I did the Kessel Run, or the Millennium Falcon, which is this main spaceship, did the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs or whatever they say. So it really is a geeky moment, but I wanted to make sure. And so the Corsair was a merchant, so I just couldn't let it go without throwing that in.
Well, that's where it triangulates so beautifully, because you make the Star Wars reference, but it's a reference to pirates in Star Wars, and it's a piece of piracy. And and I've revisited your source material since I've seen your piece, and I cannot unsee what I've learned from your piece. Like looking back at that piece from Boccaccio, it seems so hip hop now. It didn't before I saw your piece, but now I'm like, this is hip hop. And you saw that in there and brought it out.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot. It's when you read through it, and actually, what's funny? I actually broke down my pieces per paragraph from the original. So when I was reading it, I could see it in these videos, in these moments where it would just change the whole scenery because every paragraph was a new adventure, even though they seemed like it was one story, but then there were so many short stories that were in there that had to do with his journey as a merchant.
Well done. Marvelous. Well, John and Deborah and Danny, you've been so patient. It's been so long, but we certainly haven't forgotten about you, and I have so much to ask you. And I'm going to start with Deborah. You are a seasoned writer for the stage. You've mentored many people, including myself, but you write straight plays and musicals and screenwriting and opera. And of course, these were operatic films. So I would like to know, not really being a screenwriter myself, and I saw your pages as they were coming in, and they were always visually informed, and there was never a point where there was a question how this would translate itself to the screen. How did your screenwriting background inform your libretto writing background, and vice versa in this piece?
Well, screenwriting. Screenwriting is based upon the economy of image, and as soon as we received our time limit, which started at you have to do it in 7 minutes, and then it turned into 9 and then 10. But still, that's not a lot of time. We were told by Fargo that they wanted a comedy. I knew that shots were the key to the comedy, but also to telling the story quickly, because one good shot can carry a whole lot of story in a very economical way. And actually, it was interesting that in this regard, screenwriting and libretto writing were very compatible, because they're both actually very economical, right? Even though the music in opera is so expansive. So I immediately, I started with the images and figured out like how we could, I mean, we knew right away. Well, the first thing we knew was somebody was going into the closet, and we knew that we would do a visual seduction that would be built on images, and basically that's how I approached it. I created almost a storyboard to begin with, and then Michael and I began the process of writing. Now he is also he likes to write comedy, and I love to write comedy. And and we had never met each other. We didn't even know of each other. We were thrown together, and we like hit it off right away. And I also knew that there would be lots of rhymes because that works well in comedy. And so the other thing that really helped with the economy was, and we had a bunch of Zoom conversations in it. Somebody quipped, and I don't know who it was, whether it was Michael, me, or David. Yeah, dinner for 3. And like right away, the entire structure fell into place. I said, oh, right. Okay. So the opening is going to be, they're planning dinner for 2. We're going to have an over the top aria in the middle when they say goodbye, built on that aria from Fledermaus, inspired by where, they're both going off to cheat, but they sing the big tragic goodbye. That's going to be dinner for 1, dinner for 3. And so, that hook, if you will, song hook, very musical theater, basically gave us the structure for the whole piece. And then it was built around the images.
I hadn't heard that story about how Dinner for 3 came into it, and I didn't realize that it sort of gelled your concept. I love that.
Yeah. So, but of course, like everybody else, it happened very fast. And Michael and I were back and forth. We ended up working together beautifully. And he's got a real funny bone, and so. He kept saying, in our story, there's this Yenta, this old woman who works at the church, and she's hooking everybody up, right? And the first question was, well, how are we going to do this? This old woman. I said, we're not. We have cell phones, so and so an hour later, I get we have bassoons, and that opening sequence with the bassoon music came over my cell phone. I'm like, okay, great, they're in bed. They're So it was so organic back and forth, but because he was also able to work economically, because he knew that with like one really fun, bassoon motif, I guess we could have a whole scene about, you got a lot of story with that little motif. So anyway, so.
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was back and forth. It was great. Yeah.
And that's, because we've been focused on the instruments so much, we occasionally talk about the vocal line in this conversation because, of course, they're singing the words. But so much storytelling is also being done by the instruments. So it's great to hear how that came in to further your ends, but doing it via bassoon or via the orchestra.
Yeah.
Deborah, I appreciate it. Sometimes when Hilliard and I write pieces, a lot of times in the press we'll see people say, "Is this a musical?" or "Golly, this is influenced by musical theater," and it's not. I mean, we have a musical theater background, but opera has always had rhymes, and opera has always had hooks, and opera has always had numbers. And I think perhaps because a lot of 20th century opera was a little more free form than that, people have forgotten that those elements, including whimsy, have always existed in opera. And I appreciated in your piece the unabashed structure of it, that it was a numbers-based, rhyming, hooky, whimsical piece. Yeah. Is that true? I mean, do you get that from the opera that has influenced you, from your musical theater writing? Where does that come from?
Well, I think it was hooky because it was comedy. It was comedy. But one of my teachers, I was Michael Corey, and who is a really great writer of musicals and also of operas. And I was one of those people that I started as a playwright, then I started writing musical theater, and then I went to opera. And then ALT hired Michael Corey to sort of mentor me through my first opera at Fort Worth and at Fargo. And he kept saying to me, no, it's still a musical, it's still a musical. And he kept sending me back for rewrites. But he was also translating opera for me through the terms of musical theater. He said, look, opera's dirty little secret is it's show business. Never say that, but don't forget it. Opera show business. And, okay. He goes, and the trick to a good aria is a hook. It's a song hook. You know what a hook is. Well, you use that. You use it differently in opera, but it's a hook. So hook everything. So that was part of how he, trained me on my first opera. But I think I'm a real structuralist. Structure gets you 90% there, This was actually built on song form. I don't normally use song form in opera, but I don't know, it felt like it was like a truffle. We thought we're going to write this little comic truffle. So it's going to be highly formed. It's a confection. So it needed to be structured, and comedy is all about structure. So,
well, a delightful confection it was, and I love that. That's marvelous. What were the musical theater elements that he was trying to beat out of you in those exchanges?
Oh, finally he threw up his arms and he said, "Will you stop working so hard?" He said, because a playwright has to do everything through the language. You're doing all the heavy lifting. Musical theater is actually a word-driven form. I mean, the book writer is in the driver's seat and the composer, not always, but a lot of times, is helping dramatize what the book writer's doing. So I'm like a playwright and a book writer. So going to the economy of opera and to not work so hard in the words was the paradigm shift that I had to make in order to write opera. And once I've made it, I now actually work more in opera than I do in musical theater. But it was a hard lesson for me to learn. It was a hard transition from playwriting and musical writing to opera writing.
That's very interesting. That kind of goes back to my exchange with Nick here about writing comics and the art of getting the hell out of the way sometimes for people.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, John and Danny, you both directed the pieces that you wrote. John De Los Santos, you are an accomplished librettist, but also a marvelously talented director, and with a film background. And when you watch The Roost, there's some fantastic visual storytelling throughout. So I'd like to know, as how much did your screenwriting and how much did knowing you would be directing it influence your process when putting words to paper?
That's a really good question. It's they were really intertwined from the very beginning. I mean, I've told the story a million times about the fact that the pregnancy element came out of a real pregnancy, and along with the parameters that were set forward with the DOC, I mean, there were many things that I knew were already fixed. And I said to myself, well, if you're going to be directing this, then what you can be in charge of, what you can really conceive here is how the film looks and how the shots are. And so once I had all of the elements of the structure and the plot and how we were going to tie in the original story with a contemporary setting, along with some political bits, then I was able to really just put that aside and say, okay, now how can I make this look? How can I fill in a lot of the blanks in this short amount of time with shots and lighting and humor in camera movement? And so it really was, it was a really great way to express that part when there were so many things that were already set in stone based on what we had to work with.
Wow. Now, opera is such a collaborative form. And I think sometimes maybe I write lyric theater because I get lonesome. And there's always a composer that I talk to. Sometimes you write a piece before the director's hired, so you can't collaborate with the director. But oftentimes there is a director that you can speak to. When I've written new pieces with Bob Wood at Urban Arias, I can always ask Bob questions within the process and get some feedback from him. He doesn't insert himself, but if you ask him, he's happy to give dramaturgical help and so forth. Given that you were the librettist and the director, did you ever feel like you had a lack of people to turn to? Did you ever get lonesome artistically?
Not really, no, because I come from the dance world, which was very self-sufficient anyway. You have to always take care of yourself because there's always someone else who can do your job if you don't. Um, Obviously, Bob was an amazing collaborator as conductor and artistic director, and Mark Migo, the composer, was great too. But I think that I've always been a very self-sufficient artist. I love collaboration, but I have no issue taking on a lot of different things and utilizing and delegating with the people I'm working with to really unify the project. So it definitely wasn't lonely because it was so quick, like everybody's talked about. So there was a lot of communication with Mark and the singers and Bob and the instrumentalist to really get this whole thing figured out. But yeah, I think I definitely had to really make sure that I was aware of what everybody was doing all the time to really make sure that it all fit together.
So many multi-tool players on this project. I'm just in awe of the breadth of talent that everyone on this call has. John, you do have that dance background. It's a very intimate piece. It's a sexy piece. It's a physical piece. For many of us, the physical elements of this piece were a challenge because of social distancing. You had a married couple, which helps a little bit. It also helps with the intimacy. I mean, intimacy directing and intimacy coordination is such a hot button issue right now because of Me Too elements and things that have gone wrong in all of our industries. But people are taking a much more deliberate and careful approach with it. Again, you had a married couple, but how did your dance background inform? How did your directorial background inform how touching and the sexuality and the physicality came out in the piece?
Well, anytime I'm working on intimacy of any kind, it's kind of the same as fight choreography. It has to be planned. It can't be just willy-nilly go with the flow and figure it out. It has to always be safe and consensual, obviously, but it also needs to be choreographed. And whether you are cutting someone's head off in an opera or whether you are making love to them, you need to tell the story. The story and characterization needs to be carried through in the movement. And because I'd worked with Sharon Apostolou, who played Kat, so many times and done, I mean, the first opera we did together was Le Contorie, which has a threesome at the end. And I met her and we had to stage that scene 2 days after we first met. And because we established trust very, very quickly, it was a natural progression into this. But for me, if whether you're mapping out a fight or an intimate scene or any scene at all, you have to continue the narrative that's going forward and reveal more about the characters that we haven't learned so far through the text or the music thus far.
It is so much about storytelling. When I've worked with fight choreographers in the past, I know the wonderful Matt Hawkins. He's at Notre Dame now. He does a lot with Chicago Shakespeare. Really opened my eyes to how fight choreography works, and it is about storytelling. We just heard from Deborah how there's storytelling in the orchestral lines of these pieces. There's storytelling in the illustrations of these pieces. There are so many elements that at their base should be telling the story in the same direction. So perhaps it is perhaps the success of your piece came about because you have experience in so many elements of it and were able to utilize them all towards the same story.
Well, it was always very important to me for my particular piece to really embody and encapsulate the Decameron, because I feel like the entire concept of this entire project was such a unique idea and so challenging in a fun way. And I really enjoy when a producer or a dramaturg or company says, this is what we really want to do, and then figuring out a way to filter my ideas and the ideas of my collaborators into something that will really meet the needs of both the producers and the audience.
Very nice, and you certainly did. I see that it's 5:59. We haven't spoken to Danny. We're going to, so we're going to go over a few minutes. No need to rush, Danny. We may lose Donia at the end of this call, so if we do, Donia Girard, I want to congratulate you on your piece and thank you for joining us this evening. You don't have to jump off, but in case you do, thank you very much.
I'm going to hang out for another 10 minutes. I'm good.
Okay, all right. Danny, you also directed the piece, and we know from the after parties that you worked very closely with Elizabeth Blood. It sounds like it was a wonderful collaboration where all these elements that we just spoke about with John were being considered. I've asked a lot of questions tonight. Feel free to answer or respond to any of them or anything you've heard from these folks. But tell me again, please, about being the director and the librettist, those considerations as you put words to paper.
Yeah, so I feel like I started in a similar way to Deborah, which is to say, I thought in terms of the structure and the images and sort of in sections. I took a tiny sliver of the stories that I based our piece on, and from there just sort of exploded it out. There are 2 characters in the section that we used, and so it basically was a very simple alternating back and forth structure. One character we called the woman and one character we called the lover, just because they have different names in the 2 different stories. So just to keep it simple, we didn't give them, names per se, but then just structuring it, especially because I knew it was going to be played by both characters would be played by the same singer, that there was just the alternating structure of one, then the other, then going back to the first, then the other, one more cycle of that, and then they come together at the end, because the whole piece is about them trying to find each other, essentially. So from there, I just thought, okay, well, what happens in each of those sections in terms of the relative, trajectories of each of the characters, and came up with what happens visually. And then from there, I looked at the stories themselves. In one of the stories, especially, there is a big sort of narrative regression where the narrator talks about the difference between love and fortune, or the tension between love and fortune. Sorry, I got some church bells ringing across the street there. So that seemed to me the central sort of tension, or maybe in the end they kind of actually cohere in a way. But that dynamic felt like the central dynamic that I wanted to express. And so for the character that we called the woman, I had these sort of word pairs. I started with love and fortune. I knew she would say that in each of her segments. And then thinking through her dramatic trajectory, can I find some other word pairs that complement love and fortune that tell where she's at the particular point of the story? So in the beginning, it's brambles and weeds, weeds and brambles, which is just sort of exposition, her walking through the woods. The second one for the woman is hemlock and root, root and hemlock, which is her picking these poisonous herbs. And the final one is tears and poison, poison and tears, pouring the poison on, crying, and then drinking the poison. So hers was expressed in a more abstract, more poetic way. I guess they're both sort of abstract, but hers in a more structured, poetic way. And then the character that we called the lover, I don't know if it was apparent from the film, but he was actually supposed to be dead from the beginning. And so what he, with his words, I decided that he would sort of tell his story pre of what happened before he died. So in the piece, or in the stories as they're written, the 2 characters sort of meet in secret in this cavern that's connected to the woman's like chamber. It's very fantastical, but and there was something that stuck out to me, that the lover was said to have a suit of leather, and for some reason that just really stuck out to me, and I didn't know exactly why, but I just kind of went with it. So for the lover, his first section is just explaining in a very abstract way this clandestine love affair they've had. The words are, in the cavern, in the wood, my suit of leather will protect me from the briars, which is another detail from the story. In the lover's second section, I wanted him to recount his own death, and he dies in different ways in each of the 2 stories that it was based on. So one of them, he's killed by someone with a lance, and I actually lifted this phrase exactly from one of the translations that I looked at, transfixed by the lance. I was like, oh, that's good, I'm stealing that. And then in the other story, he's strangled. So I wanted to find a way that was sort of similar to transfixed by the lance, similarly ambiguous, but still sort of evoked that idea. So I came up with my breath compressed for that. And then in both stories, the most important part is that his heart is cut out and sent to the woman. So my heart severed kind of hopefully tied those two things together. And then for the lover's last section, this was actually the only line that he had in one of the two stories. He only had one line of, something that he would have actually said, which is, love can do far more than you or I, which he actually says to the father of the woman. But that kind of, Elizabeth took it and kind of made it into this really long, sort of lugubrious, like beautiful love section. Love, I don't want to say duet because it wasn't, but it almost had that feel, like duet for one almost. And then I really identified with what Donia had said about wanting to allow the singer, well, in our case, it was the composer and the singer. So I wanted to give her a good deal of creative freedom to kind of make choices on her own. Elizabeth and I had worked together for the first time about a year ago on a piece that was a cappella. So that came into this piece as well, and also included a lot of improvisation. And that was something she hadn't done before, as far as I know, but really gravitated toward and really connected with. And I thought had, done really great things with. So I wanted to see if I just give her this very spare text and say, you can repeat this, as you want, you can not repeat it, and, giving her that freedom to kind of see what would come out, tweak it from there. And it turned out that she wrote something so beautiful that I didn't want to tweak any of it. So that was kind of my process. And I know, Matt, at one point you had sent all the librettists some advice. Verdi had said, keep it really short. And I took that to heart, maybe a little bit too much, and challenged myself to only keep it to one page. And it definitely goes to what a lot of people are saying about the economy of opera libretto writing. It's very, I found that to be very true as well, that it's almost like the hanger that you hang the clothes on or something. It's like, it almost disappears and lets the other elements express themselves. For, in this case, the visuals and the music felt more present to me, I guess, if you want to say it that way. Felt more overtly present in any way. And I don't want to I'm a librettist and I love words, but to me, they almost felt like not the least important element, but something kind of on which that allowed everything else to express itself.
Well, it's, we all love words, and we all, I certainly tend towards logorrhea. Like, we love words, so we want more words. But what the French would call the mot juste, or what Verdi would call the theatrical word.
Yeah. Exactly.
Is, it's about the right word, not the most words. And of course, I say this to anyone who will listen largely, because I feel like if I say it out loud enough times, it'll sink into my own head, because I feel like I overwrite mercilessly. And if I harangue other people about it enough, maybe I'll stop overwriting. But Danny, you sent me to the dictionary with your use of the word transfixed. And I love that use of the word transfixed. And it made me do some research as to how that word has come into its proper meaning. So many students ask me or say to me, man, I want to blow up the process. I don't want to write like everybody else has written. I don't want my words to look on the page like other people did. I want to do a new thing. And of course, when it's a student, you usually say, how about you write an opera first, and then we'll blow up the system. But looking at even the artifacts, even the tools that you and Elizabeth sent back and forth to one another, the way you had these little machines of word pairings and scene pairings, you really did come up with a new process, and then you had such a successful piece that the process yielded. I'm really hats off to you for that.
Danny, something that strikes me about what you were just saying that I've just heard echoed so much here. I'm also a first-time libretto writer, as some of the other folks here, but what struck me about this whole process was that it was dialogue, right? And there's so much in dialogue. And when I learned how to write good dialogue, it was about showing what's not being said. Like, people don't say exactly what's happening. They say something and there's so much cloaked behind that meaning, and there's so much that isn't in the words. It's like in between the words. And so that's just something that keeps popping up again and again and again. I just wanted to recognize that, like, I think that's what makes a lot of these pieces so natural and so powerful, is that in this specific art form, it's this way of writing dialogue that allows there to be so much nuance and so much meaning behind what isn't being said as well. So I think your piece did that really well.
Thank you.
Before we go, does anyone else have any other comments or questions for the other writers? Things that have been sparked from what they've said, questions or compliments? I want to remind the audience, of course, again, that tickets are available through the end of the year. And if you already have your tickets, Tales from a Safe Distance remains up on demand till the end of the year at DecameronOperaCoalition.org. I might have seen some mics turn on.
I just want to thank everybody for their work. I just love the variety and the diversity here. It was every single piece was fabulous. So thank you all for that.
Yeah, I definitely want to piggyback on that idea of everyone's was so different and so unique. And I'm so glad that everyone just pursued the direction that they did. And we didn't get 9 pieces that were, strict adaptations necessarily. That was really awesome to see the way that everyone interpreted it in their own way and just had so much variety.
I found it so much fun to, as you say, Danny, everyone's different approaches, different ways of taking the same parameters and doing something totally new with it. And also, I have learned so much through this process as well. So that's something I'm incredibly grateful to everyone assembled in these little boxes now for, was, as Jenny was saying, being first time librettists. There was a lot to be learned in this process, and I'm very grateful for that too. So yeah, that's a thank you to you guys, as well as you were all fantastic in the works you produced.
Thank you to all of you marvelous artists for joining us here tonight. You were very generous with your time and with your creativity and with your thoughts, and we very much appreciate it. To the viewers tonight, thank you very much for joining us on this Friday night, and come back December 4th, Friday, for the composers. I don't know if they'll talk as pretty as we did, but they'll have something to say.